think I want to start by saying it's easy, and I've been someone who's done this, to sit in a class or a service and listen to someone preach or teach and think, man, they've really figured it out, or they're really smart, or they're really, you fill in the blank. We make some assumptions based on what we hear. And I've heard my husband say this, and I kind of tease him about it sometimes, but he'll say, I'm just not really that smart. Don't give me credit for putting all this together. And this is one of those lessons where I'm not that smart. Like, I didn't think it was going to come together. And then the Lord, I think He's always going to push us to grow outside of our comfort zone. And it is my comfort zone to be prepared way ahead of time. And there's a lot of times that He doesn't allow me that luxury. And so, about 11 weeks ago, I was in a car accident, as most of you know. And when I say it came out of nowhere, it literally came out of nowhere. I was driving down the street where I live, and I was actually approaching an intersection where Ellie, Jason, and I, about a year and a half before, had been driving through the same intersection, and we had been in an accident with someone running a red light. And so as I approached the intersection, I slowed down like I always do because of what I had experienced before. And as I turned to my left, in the millisecond it took for me to turn my head, my car exploded. And I don't mean literally, but the inside seemed to explode with all of the airbags. And if you've ever been in an accident of that magnitude, it seems like everything happens in a split second, and you're just disoriented. The world explodes.
Right.
And so it came completely without warning. And according to witnesses, the driver who hit me never even looked up from her phone. She was on her phone. She never slowed. She never braked. And so my car was totaled. And had I gotten to the intersection just 1 second sooner, I probably wouldn't be here today. I had a friend years ago who was in a car accident, and she said she had PTSD. And I'm going to be honest with you, I never told her this, but I seriously doubted her. I kind of thought she was being ridiculous when she claimed that she had anxiety and depression. I had been in an accident, a really bad accident before, and I had not experienced anything like that. And so I feigned compassion on the outside, but I thought, she's being silly and really immature.
Bless her heart.
Bless her heart. That's a good. So now here we are over 10 years later, and I'm standing here to tell you I understand now. Because this accident that I was in was very different, because I had no warning, and I became extremely fearful of going through intersections that didn't have complete visibility, because part of the problem was the intersection I went through had no visibility on the left. So when I turned, I couldn't see until I'm in the intersection. So when they tell you lightning doesn't strike twice at the same place, I'm gonna be frank with you, they lie. Because I was hit in the same intersection by someone running a red light going the exact same direction.
Wow.
The only difference was the first time I was the passenger and now I was the driver. So I got where I was no longer going through this intersection. I'd take a different route home.
Smart.
And so one day I'm running errands and I'm coming from that direction, and as you do, sometimes my brain went on autopilot, and before I realized it, I'm approaching that intersection from the same direction. And of course, at this point, there's a car behind me, I can't turn around. So when I made it through the intersection, I realized that I felt like I was having a heart attack, and I was having a mild panic attack behind the wheel of my car. And I can tell you, I can count on one hand the times. In fact, the only time I ever remember having a genuine panic attack is one time. So this is not something that, even though I am anxious at times, I don't regularly suffer panic attacks. But every time I left my house, I was feeling like I was avoiding accidents the entire drive. I saw danger everywhere that I looked. I started joking and telling Jason and pretty much anybody I talked to that driving in Beaumont was like driving in the Wild West. And to some degree, that's true. But with all that said, I'm not going to break down all the details because we've all been around most part. I know that we have some visitors, but most of us have been around the church for the last few months. We know all the things that have transpired in the last few months. I think we see considerable and various heartaches that have been experienced by our church family members in different situations. I mean, all it takes is a stroll through GroupMe to know people are experiencing hard things almost every day.
Sure.
And when I stop and think about it, sometimes my chest hurts with the gravity of it, with the heartache of what people are going through. Matthew 5:45 says, "It rains on the just and the unjust." And I think the context of this chapter is fascinating. Jesus is teaching the crowds on a mountainside, and he's starting with what we call now the Beatitudes. Blessed are the poor in spirit, for theirs is the kingdom of heaven. Blessed are those who mourn, for they shall be comforted. Blessed are the meek, for they'll inherit the earth. I could read the whole thing, but you're probably familiar with it. So then he goes on in this message on the mountainside to discuss being salt and light. He discusses the fulfillment of the law. He talks about murder, adultery, divorce, oaths, an eye for an eye, and he concludes with loving your enemies.
Yeah.
But in all of this, the consistent theme is that what matters is the heart and not necessarily what's right on the surface in front of our eyes.
Yeah, intention.
Yes, and so intentions, that's a very good way to put it. And I want to go back now and I want to read the Beatitudes with more intention. Blessed are the poor in spirit, for theirs is the kingdom of heaven. Blessed are those who mourn, for they will be comforted. Blessed are the meek, for they will inherit the earth. Blessed are those who hunger and thirst for righteousness, for they will be filled. Blessed are the merciful. I'm going to pause. I want to talk about the poor in spirit, those who mourn. Doesn't sound like much fun. The meek, the merciful. Do we stop and think about, that sounds great, blessed are the merciful, but what circumstance do you have to be in to be merciful?
Yeah.
It's got to be something that's difficult or uncomfortable. Blessed are the pure in heart. Blessed are the peacemakers. Again, that sounds pretty on paper, but being a peacemaker requires a difficult situation, for they will be called the children of God. Blessed are those who are persecuted because of righteousness, for theirs is the kingdom of heaven. In light of this lesson, what stood out to me was the hurt and the difficulty. Yet Jesus is calling every one of these scenarios blessed. So I know that it rains on the just and the unjust, and I know that God uses difficult circumstances for his glory and for our good. Romans 8:28 says, and we know that all things work. We know, and I'm going to read I think it's the NIV version. And we know that in all things God works for the good of those who love him, who have been called according to his purpose. And I've preached to this class and I've preached to my family. Rather than not ask, why me? Ask, why not me? Mm-hmm. And because of everything I know, because of what I believe wholeheartedly, because of the things that I teach fervently, I've been trying to put a smile on my face, be brave, be positive, speak life, and set a godly example of how to live and behave in adversity. I'm acutely aware that it's not about me. I'm acutely aware that there are people that are watching. I'm aware that I set the pace in my home. I know that I'm responsible for the role that I play in the body of Christ. Still, I wasn't finding comfort in knowing that it rains on the just and the unjust. All I had experienced in the last 3 months seemed to scream danger and impending tribulation. Everything that had happened seemed to threaten that my family, my children, myself, or those near me who I dearly loved, including my church family, were next. I kept my confident mask on. Then a couple of weeks ago, I was driving through Beaumont with Jason, Caroline, and Judah, and as I drove down this 5-lane road, I believe it was 11th Street. I keep questioning that. Chatting with Jason and Caroline and Judah, I noticed off to the left on the side of the road, these kids that were twirling signs and they're jumping up and down and waving their hands and they're doing some kind of fundraiser. Well, as I'm driving and talking and I see that, suddenly 2 men appear and they're standing in the turning lane. And when I tell you they're like, I'm just whizzing right by them. And I hadn't seen them, and I really felt like it was the grace of God that I didn't hit them. But then looking back, I'm like, I was never going to be in the turning lane. I was headed straight. But I felt fear grip my heart over what could have been. And I told Jason, I said, I almost feel like I need to go back and I need to explain to this fundraising group that they've set up a deadly misdirection. Jason, who is not as passionate as I am, I know you're all shocked, you know, this way to call her. He said, why are you so emotional about this? So I began to explain to him that when I took neurological psychology, I learned that there are structures in our brain that interpret sensory information, what we see, hear, and feel, so on. And they have an order of priority that dictates how we process incoming information. In extremely basic terms, the brain has one structure that perceives motion, it has another that senses color, another that sees outlines and size, and another that recognizes faces, and you get the idea. The portion that receives motion is also broken further down by what kinds of motion, and if I remember correctly, that includes like one sees up and down, one sees side to side, and so they're all broken down into these very finely tuned jobs. So to go further, the motion detectors, if we want to call them that, can't see color. The facial recognition system can't tell what the person's wearing. And so hopefully you get the idea. It's highly specialized. So the brain prioritizes what information you receive first. And it prioritizes motion super high on the list. This means that motion is one of the first things that you detect when you're approaching a scenario. On that previously mentioned day when we're driving down 11th, the individuals on the side of the road were so attention-getting that they blinded drivers to people standing in the middle of the road.
Right.
The Invisible Gorilla is a book published in 2010, co-authored by Christopher Chabris and Daniel Simons Simons. I hope I'm not butchering their names. The title of the book refers to an earlier research project by Chabris and Simons, revealing that people who are focused on one thing can easily overlook something else. To demonstrate this effect, they created a video where students pass a basketball between themselves. Viewers asked to count the number of times the basketball players with the white shirts passed the ball, often failed to notice the person in a gorilla suit who appears in the center of the image. The experiment is described as one of the most famous psychological demos ever, and Simons and Chabris were actually awarded a Nobel Prize because of this experiment. I think God created our brains this way to protect us. In the majority of situations, something fast-moving is more indicative of danger than what the person is wearing. Still, this particularity can be dangerous in and of itself if we're not aware. Magicians, pickpockets, and con men are some of those who use this knowledge very skillfully. One of the definitions of illusion is psychology, a perception as a visual stimuli, optical illusion that represents what is perceived in a very different way than what is reality. Illusionism in art history means the artistic tradition in which artists create a work of art that appears to share the physical space with the viewer. So what does all this mean? I knew the Lord was dealing with me about something. He was trying to draw out some truth that he wanted me to see. And Jason and I actually planned this whole lesson on illusion and how the enemy can use it against us. And there are even there are examples in nature and in warfare where people, animals use illusion to against the enemy. Well, as you all know, I got extremely sick last week, and I'll be honest, I was frustrated because I was excited about the lesson. In the meantime, God started to deal with me about a different subject, and I thought, well, I guess we've missed that opportunity. Sometimes the Lord deals with us as teachers, and at first we think it's for class, and then we realize it's really not for class, it's just for me. And so I chalked it up to that being the case, and I moved on to this new subject that I felt like the Lord was dealing with me about. So over the last few months, I'd had conversations with my girls and a few others about the difference between trust and understanding. The command to trust God is found numerous times in the Bible. The command to trust God is found numerous times in the Bible. While the Bible does instruct us to get understanding, it doesn't repeatedly command us to understand. I kept feeling drawn toward a comparison of trust and understanding, and I found that trusting God in one form or another is used 191 times in the Bible. Similarly, fear not is the most repeated command in the Bible, and some sources say it can be found 365 times or once for every day of the year. Understanding in one form or another is only found 159 times. For me, the most noteworthy verse is Proverbs 4:7, and I'm reading King James first. Wisdom is the principal thing, therefore get wisdom, and with all thy getting, get understanding. But I like the way the Holman Christian Standard Bible says it. It says, wisdom is supreme, so get wisdom, and whatever else you get understanding. It's not as if understanding is unimportant. It just seems to me that God values trust over understanding. As a parent, I completely get this. I want my children to have understanding, and in fact, I feel like I'm constantly explaining the who, what, when, where, how, almost every day. And I encourage questions. I'm not uncomfortable with why. I want to raise kids who think for themselves. I want to raise kids who have the ability for metacognition, which is the ability to think about why we think what we think.
Right.
So in spite of that, I have reinforced the idea of parental authority. I explained that sometimes there's going to be a quality to my voice. A command is going to go forth, and I need them to obey without question. This is for their safety, and every now and then I don't have time for explanations. I don't abuse my authority. I feel like because I said so is unhealthy when used unnecessarily. So I realized that as a parent, I value trust over understanding. I begin to consider this juxtaposition of trust and understanding, and I felt like God was leading me in a new direction, but it wasn't coming together as like a full-fledged lesson. And so I suggested to Jason, I said, hey, why don't we create a worksheet with some questions and instruction, kind of how we've done before, break out into groups, and we'll do a micro Bible lesson on trust and understanding. And he's like, we can do that. And so our plan was yesterday to put the worksheet together. And then early yesterday morning, I woke up, and immediately upon waking, I felt the Lord say, for we live by faith, not by sight. 2 Corinthians 5:7. So I pulled out my Bible and I read 2 Corinthians 5, and I want to share verses 1 through 10. I believe this is the NIV. I normally write it down, and I didn't this time. For we know that if the earthly tent we live in is destroyed, we have a building from God, an eternal house in heaven, not built by human hands. Meanwhile, we groan, longing to be clothed instead with our heavenly dwelling. Because when we are clothed, we will not be found naked. For while we're in this tent, we groan and are burdened, because we do not wish to be unclothed, but to be clothed instead with our heavenly dwelling, so that what is mortal may be swallowed up by life. Now the one who has fashioned us for this very purpose is God, who has given us the Spirit as a deposit, guaranteeing what is to come. Therefore, we are always confident and know that as long as we are at home in the body, we are away from the Lord. For we live by faith, not by sight. We are confident, I say, and would prefer to be away from the body and at home with the Lord. So we make it our goal to please Him, whether we are at home in the body or away from it. For we must all appear before the judgment seat of Christ, so that each of us may receive what is due for the things done while in the body, whether good or bad. I had, just in my daily Bible reading, I had read the creation account this week, and something new stood out for me. And I talk about the creation account a lot. It's very, I guess it's where everything started. That sounds basic, but it really is. And so I think it's amazing that we can read the same passage of scripture repeatedly and gain new insight every time. And I think it's why it's important and we've stressed in this class, you don't have to read the Bible the way I read the Bible, but I do think it's important that you read it through more than one time in your life. It's not a one and done situation, because you gain new revelation every time. As I read the creation account, though, and I read that Adam and Eve understood they were naked, as I read it this time, I was struck with a feeling of vulnerability. Because of what I'd been experiencing lately, I was acutely aware of my own vulnerability. I've confessed here before to all of you that I don't like vulnerability. To me, it feels as uncomfortable as Adam and Eve must have felt, realizing they're standing before God in all of creation completely naked.
Right.
Yeah. Good.
So now as I read 2 Corinthians 5, I'm noticing that the writer is describing this feeling of nakedness. He explains that while we live in the flesh and this mortal life here on earth, we're vulnerable. He says that vulnerability won't exist once we're in heaven. He tells us in verse 5 that God himself prepared us for this, giving us his Spirit as a deposit toward heaven. So it all started to come together. Proverbs 3:5 says, "Trust in the Lord with all thine heart and lean not to thine understanding." The NLT says, "Trust in the Lord with all your heart. Do not depend on your own understanding." The God who created humankind for a relationship with him, to display his glory and to partner with him in accomplishing his will, also made the human mind with very basic survival skills that are innate. I believe this is because God is such a loving creator that he instilled life-saving instincts for those even who would refuse his Spirit to allow as much time as possible for reconciliation. That same loving God is also an intentional God who created us with vulnerabilities. We're not designed to survive isolated or independent. Our vulnerability reminds us that we cannot make it without his Spirit and without his help. As I was sick last Sunday, and like probably the worst sick I've been in a long time, but something pushed me to turn on live stream. And I was desperate to feel better. I'd been sick for days, and I had told him on Saturday, I'm sure I'll be better by this weekend. And then it was like, by Sunday, I'm sure I'll be on the mend. And I woke up and I was still so sick. And so I'm desperate. I'm like, I've just got to do something to move the needle. And so I took my phone with live stream and I went and sat on the edge of our pool and just sat on the ledge there, trying to get some sunlight and just get out of the bedroom, do whatever I could to try to feel human again. And as I sat on the pool's edge with live stream playing, I began to weep. And I told God about my fears and my insecurities. And I bitterly said to him, God, I'm completely and totally helpless and inadequate without you. And you see, that feels like failure to me. But to God, it's a sweet fragrance.
Mm-hmm.
Psalm 51:17 says, the sacrifice you desire is a broken spirit. You will not reject a broken and repentant heart, O God. Our humanistic world constantly reinforces the message that we must do it all alone. Just this week, I came across a media post that said, no one's coming to rescue you. No one is going to do it for you. It's all up to you. You have to go out there and get it for yourself. You get the idea. The message is hustle, be independent. Try this. No, try that. Don't eat this. Eat that instead. Well, that's not good for you. Eat this. Do this kind of workout. No, that workout's not suitable for your body type. Try this instead. Stay busy. No, you need rest. Get all of these things, like collect the whole set. No, get rid of everything that you don't absolutely need for survival. This will fulfill you. No, this will fulfill you. This will hurt you. No, it won't. This is good for you. You get the idea.
Yeah.
It's everywhere. We're bombarded.
Yeah.
Trust in the Lord.
Mm-hmm.
Lean not to your own understanding. Walk by faith, not by sight. We live in a culture that's completely counter to what the word says. Peace is found in surrendering my vulnerabilities to him and asking him, what do you want me to do with this? 2 Corinthians 4:7 says, but we have this treasure in jars of clay to show that the surpassing power belongs to God and not for us. We are created for his glory, and we reveal his glory in our brokenness. 2 Corinthians 12:8-10 says, 3 different times I begged the Lord to take it away. Each time he said, my grace is all you need. My power works best in weakness. So now I am glad to boast about my weakness so that the power of Christ can work through me. That's why I take pleasure in my weaknesses and in the insults, hardships, persecutions, and troubles that I suffer for Christ. For when I'm weak, then I am strong. Be careful that you don't fall for the illusion.
Yeah.
What we see is not always what is happening.
It's true.
We live by faith and not by sight. I think it's really easy, and I'm guilty of it. I'm not someone who's going to tell you don't do social media whatsoever, because I think, and if that's what you need to do for your salvation, that's a whole different topic. But as a general rule, it is a part of the world we live in. We are a global community. But I think we have to be very careful, because anyone who wants to can put themselves up as an expert.
Intentions.
I mean, are you going to stop and verify every post you look at? And it's very easy to mindlessly take in the messages that we're receiving from the world.
Yeah.
Our vulnerability is by design. God didn't make a mistake. Your circumstances, our circumstances, did not catch him by surprise. He sees the illusion for what it really is. But he wants us to trust him more than we need understanding.
That's good.
I heard somebody say recently, he's the only one who can make something out of nothing.
Mm-hmm.
It's a fact we all know, but I think we forget sometimes.
Yeah.
He doesn't operate in the economy that we operate in. But we've got to be careful about the messages we're taking in. We've got to be thoughtful about what we're exposing ourselves to, we have to incorporate that into our prayer life. You know, God, filter my thoughts through your word. It's again why you have to read the word every day. I'm not telling you have to read a prescribed number of chapters or a prescribed amount of time, but the word washes our mind. It renews our mind. And I say all that to encourage somebody. The suffering, the difficulty, it's by design. And I've said similar before, and sometimes I've told y'all I feel like a broken record, but it's like he keeps reminding me, because, and I think of the scripture, and I'll be honest, this just came to me, so I've not read this in context, but I hear when God was talking to Paul, he said, you kick against the pricks.
Yes.
Sometimes we're fighting against the exact thing he's trying to use to get us in the right direction.
Right.
And we're pushing against it and saying, no, I don't like that. It's uncomfortable. It's miserable.
Yeah.
And we, again, it's, what am I looking at? But is this really, and it's kind of like what you talked about last week, the problem's not really the problem.
Yeah.
Right.
What I'm seeing right in front of my face is not necessarily the real issue. And so opening my eyes to God, what are you trying to do here? How are you trying to use this? And how do you get the glory, even in a difficult situation?
Yeah.
So good.
And